In the records of St. Mercia's Orphan Asylum, one entry stands out not for what it says, but for how little it tries to explain. Dated July 14, 1841, it simply notes, "Child found in corridor, barefoot, consuming fluid from the chapel floor. No resistance to retrieval, no spoken language." The file was signed by Sister Clarentine, who would later disappear under circumstances still marked as unresolved. According to the surviving pages of the asylum's visitor logs, the child had no name and no prior registration. She had not been admitted formally, nor had she been reported missing. A single witness, an apprentice gravedigger named Elias Croft, claimed he saw a woman leave a bundled figure at the western gate just before dawn, then vanish into the woods behind the cemetery. When asked to describe her, he could only say she walked like she never expected to return. The child was estimated to be between 5 and 7 years old, severely malnourished and unable to speak. But what disturbed the staff more than her silence was her behavior. She showed no fear, no reaction to pain, and no interest in the other orphans. What she did seem drawn to, according to internal notes from the head caretaker, was the chapel. Each morning, without fail, she would be found there, crouched low to the ground, lips pressed against the flagstone floor beneath the altar rail. When asked what she was doing, she would only stare. Once, when Sister Marina gently tried to pull her away, the child bit down on the stone and cracked her front tooth. She made no sound. Rumors among the older orphans spread quickly. They whispered that the girl was drinking something no one else could see, that her hands always smelled of iron. One child swore he saw her licking at a long red smear that hadn't been there the night before, and which, by morning, had vanished entirely. An inspection was requested by Father Hildebrand, the diocese-appointed overseer. In his report, now held in the diocesan archive in Antwerp, he wrote, "The girl exhibits signs of religious fixation, possibly traumatic in origin. No outward signs of abuse, but consistent repetition of prostration and oral contact with the chapel floor suggest obsessive-compulsive behaviors or ritual imitation. Recommend isolation and monitored catechesis." But isolation only worsened the situation. Locked in a prayer cell overnight, she clawed through the wood of the doorframe and was discovered at sunrise curled beneath the altar again, eyes wide open, lips raw and bleeding. There were no signs of how she'd escaped. No broken hinges. No forced lock. Just deep scratches, fingernail-sized, along the inner jamb. For the next several months, Sister Clarentine took it upon herself to study the girl. In her personal notes, later retrieved from her quarters after her disappearance, she wrote, "She moves in silence but prays in motion. Her tongue knows what our tongues have forgotten. She follows something, someone, not present in our rituals." In one entry, dated September 3rd, she included a drawing, the chapel floor with a series of dots and lines traced from memory. "This is the path she follows with her tongue," she wrote. "It is consistent, intentional, and never varies by more than a few inches. I believe it is a script, not written, but embedded." Whether this theory was ever verified is unclear. The drawing was later seized by Father Hildebrand and labeled non-canonical speculation. He ordered the chapel scrubbed thoroughly and the girl placed under round-the-clock supervision. That night, Sister Clarentine vanished. Her bed was unslept in. Her room, untouched. The only trace of her was a smudge of blood beneath the altar rail, precisely where the child had once been found. From that point onward, the girl was labeled a risk to spiritual cohesion and removed from the chapel entirely. Yet she never resisted, never cried, never asked for anything, only stared, always toward the chapel door. According to the final log entry before her transfer to the diocesan holding convent, one of the caretakers found her early one morning kneeling in the corridor, licking a crack in the tile that stretched all the way from her room to the chapel threshold. There was no red fluid, no visible trail, but her tongue, they noted, was stained black. In the hills of Strathmere, where the fog rolls in like memory refusing to fade, there once stood a house commissioned by the Order of St. Clelia. Its purpose, according to diocesan records, was charitable, a sanctuary for displaced innocents, orphaned by conflict, unfit for urban integration. The application was approved in 1838. Construction finished within the year, but locals called it the house with no windows, long before its doors opened. Blueprints obtained decades later confirm the rumors. Not a single opening to the outside world, save for the central oculus in the ceiling of the dining hall, a circle of smoked glass that filtered even the noonday sun into a muted glow. The walls were thick stone, the kind used in prisons or fortresses. There were no mirrors permitted, no polished metal, and the lamps were all fitted with amber glass, dulling every flame. 20 children were brought in that first winter, survivors from bombarded ports, abandoned rural farms, and a few from convents that no longer accepted unbaptized arrivals. None of them remembered their surnames. Few spoke. All were between the ages of 5 and 9. The caretakers were nuns from a silent order, the Sisters of Perpetual Shelter, trained not in pedagogy but in containment. At dusk each day, the halls fell silent. The few clocks in the house were stripped of their chimes. Doors were to be locked from the outside. Conversation was forbidden after sunset. If a child needed water, they were to knock once. If they had a nightmare, they were to wait until morning. This was not cruel, the instructions stated, but preventive. One surviving letter, written by a groundskeeper and later smuggled out to a cousin in Bell Cross, includes the line, "They say it's charity, but I've never seen such fear in the way a curtain is pinned shut." He left his post 3 weeks later, citing wrongness that doesn't rot but breathes. The children adapted quickly. Too quickly, some thought. Meals were consumed in perfect silence. No child ever tried to leave. They never asked about the world beyond the walls. When one girl was asked by a visiting priest what she remembered of her life before, she reportedly answered, "There was no before. There's only the red path." When pressed, she simply repeated it, the red path, until she was removed from the room. Within months, signs of ritual behavior began to surface. Scratches arranged in repeating arcs on the inside of the dormitory doors, symbols drawn in food on the dining hall floor. One child was found motionless in the cellar, hands clasped in prayer, eyes open and fixed toward the stone wall. When lifted away, her palms left 2 red stains. No source of blood was found on her body. The official explanation from the order described it as trauma ritualization, a condition observed in war-displaced youth. But the logs tell a more coordinated story. Children began to wake at the same time, 3:11 a.m., every night, standing beside their beds, heads bowed. The sisters attempted to stop the pattern with medication. It had no effect. One sister, Sister Madeleine, requested to leave. Her petition included the sentence, "They know more than we teach them." She disappeared 3 days later. Her shoes were found outside the main entrance, placed side by side, soles still warm. As time went on, the children became quieter still. Their drawings, at first primitive, became intricate. Lines mimicked architecture. Circles aligned with compass points. One wall in the North Hall had to be scrubbed clean after all 20 children pressed their foreheads against it in silence for 3 consecutive hours. When asked why, one boy simply said, "It's listening." The house's founder, Father Aurelian, visited in the spring of 1840 for inspection. In his private journal, preserved only through an unsigned transcript, he wrote, "They believe they are watched, and perhaps they are. But the question is not by whom, it is for how long." The house was never closed. It was absorbed into a wider network under a different name. But no child ever left by official record. No adoptions. No relocations. They aged out, or so the reports say. And yet, in the nearby village of Bremer's Hollow, stories still circulate of pale figures seen on misty nights near the old chapel ruins. Children with eyes too wide for their faces. Children who leave no footprints. Children who do not knock when they reach your door. Parish records list no regular Mass at the estate after 1841. The priest assigned to oversee weekly Eucharist, Father Lennox, submitted a formal withdrawal that same year, stating only, "They have their own rights now." When the bishopric requested clarification, none came. The matter was quietly archived, but oral accounts from former staff and nearby villagers tell of something stranger replacing the sacrament. Each Sunday, just before the sun reached its highest point behind the smoked glass dome, the children were lined up in the atrium barefoot, hands open, eyes lowered. A woman, unnamed in official records but referred to in surviving letters as Mother Eliel, would step forward. She wore no habit. Her garments were dark red, floor-length, and always clean, even in the wet season. From her bare hands, she poured a viscous liquid into each child's palms, thick, steaming, and a shade of crimson too dark to be wine. The children drank, always in silence. Some cupped their hands again, but were ignored. When asked what it tasted like, one boy replied, "Warm sleep." Another said, "Voice." The contents of the drink were never disclosed. No one outside the compound ever saw it prepared. The kitchen sisters claimed not to handle it. The substance was not stored, and no animals were ever seen delivered for meat or milk. There were no vineyards on the property, no bees. Yet the liquid came every Sunday, exact in portion and temperature. The changes began subtly. The younger children, once frail and undernourished, began to grow rapidly. Their posture stiffened. Their speech, already sparse, deepened into a slow, measured cadence. When reading aloud, their voices harmonized unnaturally, like a single note split across 20 mouths. By the summer solstice of that year, even visiting officials remarked on their startling maturity. One visitor from the Archdiocese of Durrell noted, "I greeted what I assumed was a young postulant, only to find her listed as 7 years of age." Physical strength followed. Benches once dragged with effort were lifted easily. A wrought iron gate, sealed since the foundation was laid, was found unhinged one morning. No tools, no tracks. The children did not boast of it, they only stared when questioned. Unblinking, unified. Caretakers began to whisper of shared dreams. Multiple children rising with identical drawings, identical phrases. "He is beneath. She feeds him through us." One nun swore she heard the same sentence spoken in 5 voices at once, though only one mouth moved. The sisters began to withdraw. Many refused to enter the atrium during the feeding. One, Sister Leora, recorded in a hidden diary that the children's mouths no longer moved as they drank. "It disappears," she wrote, "without swallowing, as if their hands absorb it." Another entry simply reads, "We are Eucharist now. We are the feast." Then came the changes in the house itself. Paintings on the walls, once standard depictions of saints in scripture, began to alter. Where halos once glowed, black rings appeared. Hands, once raised in blessing, now clutched indistinct objects. In the dining hall, a fresco of the Last Supper slowly faded until only the bread and wine remained. The figures vanished, but the meal persisted. Attempts to repaint failed. Fresh pigment would peel away within hours, revealing the altered images beneath. On Trinity Sunday, the children gathered without being summoned. Each stood in a perfect circle beneath the oculus. Mother Eliel raised her hands, but this time there was no elixir. Instead, the children spoke together. "We have eaten enough. Now we carry him." They did not explain further. From that day on, they stopped asking for food. Meals were prepared, but left untouched. No one grew thin, no one weakened. Their energy never flagged. One sister remarked, "They fasted 3 weeks, and yet they moved like lions." Blood tests, rarely permitted, showed anomalies: elevated core temperatures, irregular white cell counts. One child's sample congealed instantly when exposed to light. Another's clotted into a spiral. Then there were the voices. Not theirs, but what they heard. At night, they stood near walls, whispering as if replying to something only they could detect. Some used languages no one had taught them. One girl recited a passage in perfect Latin, despite no instruction, and when asked its meaning answered, "It's not for your tongue." The sisters' reports, increasingly erratic, began using new terminology: chronic contamination, non-divine sacrament, reversal of holy appetite. At least 3 caregivers were committed to distant abbeys for nervous collapse. Their statements were redacted. In one surviving report, misspelled, tear-stained, unsigned, a final line appears before the ink trails off. They are not devout. They are full. The servant was new, 16, freshly arrived from a convent in the eastern province. Her name, recorded only once on an employment ledger, was Claire N., and she stayed less than a month. Most didn't remember her. A quiet girl with chapped hands who never met your eye. But the kitchen ledger from 1846 records a notation in her handwriting. Small, pressed tightly into the margin beneath a list of root vegetables. "I found them, not just the mice." On the 3rd Sunday of Lent, the kitchens flooded, not from the pipes, they had none, but from the stones themselves, dark water seeping up through cracks that hadn't been there before. While the others swept and cursed, Claire noticed a pattern. The puddle gathered in the same place each time, near the spice rack, where the flagstones discolored slightly under light. She waited until dusk. After the kitchens cleared, she returned with a dull butter knife and began picking at the grout. It was soft, too soft for stone-sealed 50 years ago. The slab gave way within 20 minutes. Beneath it, not a hollow space, but fabric, oilcloth, folded tight around something bound with twine and wax. She unwrapped it slowly, like handling meat gone warm. Inside, 27 pages. Torn from multiple ledgers, different inks, some childlike, others neat and square. The first line, in a scratchy, hurried scrawl, "If you find this, they told you it was holy. It isn't." Most pages were undated, but 2 bore names long erased from the orphanage's official records: Isolde G., Michelle R., Tamsin V., none of whom appear in any surviving group photographs. Yet one photo, found later in a sealed drawer, shows 26 children when only 25 were recorded. The smallest figure in the back, barely visible, has eyes completely blackened. Whether by damage or intent remains unclear. Claire's discovery included accounts of rooms that no longer existed: a cradle hall, a blessing chamber, a warm cellar beneath the old chapel. The pages reference rituals unfamiliar to any known Catholic rite. One reads, "We gave blood on Fridays, not enough to die, just enough to dream louder." Another, from a hand that trembles mid-sentence, "She kissed our palms after. Said we'd feel full, I only felt cold, but she said hunger is proof you're chosen." There are lists too, names paired with symbols, some crossed out violently, others smeared by water or what appears to be blood. One sheet contains only a repeated phrase, "We are the bread, we are the wine, we are the meal." Beneath that, a final line in different ink, "And the meal remembers." Claire brought the bundle to Sister Yvain, the kitchen overseer. According to Yvain's later testimony, signed but retracted under pressure, she burned the pages that same night in the bread oven. But one page survived. Claire kept it. Sewn into the hem of her apron found after she was dismissed and sent back east. It reads, "The elixir is not food, it is anchor. It keeps him in us." No further record of Claire N. exists, but 2 months after her departure, the tiles in the kitchen began to crack. Not from above, but from below. The first to report it was Brother Gaymond, a visiting cleric assigned to inventory the estate's chapel relics. He'd been offered a room near the girls' dormitory, what they called the East Wing, though the house had no compass markings and windows were forbidden. On his third night, he heard whispers through the wall, rhythmic, punctuated by sharp intakes of breath, like chanting performed underwater. He assumed it was a game. Children murmuring nonsense to stay awake. But when he mentioned it over breakfast, the matron stiffened. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth, then resumed as if nothing had been said. That evening, he listened again. This time, closer. He placed a candle near the wall and pressed his ear against the plaster. Not a game, not gibberish, Latin, or something close to it, archaic declensions, ecclesiastical in cadence but with odd constructions. One phrase repeated often, "Mater rubra, veni domum." He asked the children gently if they had a Latin reader. None, only the Psalter in the local tongue. He asked the girl in the bed closest to the whispering, Eleanor, to whom she was speaking at night. She blinked slowly, then began to draw on her bedsheet with her fingertip, circular symbols. One resembled a sun, but with teeth. Another, a key inserted into an eye. The matron claimed Eleanor was mute, that she'd never spoken aloud in her life. The next night, Brother Gaymond stayed awake with parchment and ink. He tried to transcribe what he heard. The ink bled from his pen before he finished the first line. The second night, the ink clotted. The third, the parchment curled in the heatless dark. He gave up. On the fourth night, he entered the dormitory. Eleanor was sitting upright, eyes closed, speaking with perfect clarity. The Red Mother feeds the tongue first, then the throat, then the root. He asked her what the root was. "Where we keep the true names," she replied, still asleep, "so they don't rot." Eleanor didn't wake. But after that, she began drawing constantly, on walls, sheets, skin. They had to bind her hands each night. At sunrise, she never remembered. One of her drawings, made in soot on the underside of a wooden basin, matched a sigil found later in a suppressed ecclesiastical codex labeled Index Vesperae, which cataloged banned symbols used in unsanctioned monastic rites. The matching symbol bore a footnote, "Used in rites of inherited burden, associated with the doctrine of mouth-borne possession." By spring, 5 other children were sleep-speaking. Each murmured different fragments. When played together in sequence, they formed a litany, a call and response, an invocation. No one taught them Latin. No one showed them the words. Yet each child whispered as if remembering something too deep for waking. The matron banned further questions. And Brother Gaymond? He left without his travel bag, His ledger, left behind, ends with a final sentence scratched into the back cover. They are not learning, they are remembering, and she is already speaking through them. There is only one known report bearing the inspector's signature. A brief memorandum written at noon on the day he arrived, addressed to the Department of Welfare in Montreuil. It mentions a promising model of post-war care, though the handwriting appears rushed, with ink pooling at the edges of each sentence. The page ends with, "Will return before dusk. Dinner offered. Declined for now." The man's name was Albert Coudray. He had inspected dozens of institutions, factories, schools, asylums, known for his punctuality and restraint, but in the records of the estate, his name never appears. Only an entry in the kitchen ledger that reads, cryptically, "One guest, meal prepared, not traveling." The driver who brought him testified later that Inspector Coudray seemed disturbed before entering. He said the house looked like it hadn't been built. It looked like it had been revealed, the driver recalled, like the earth was trying to forget it. Still, he knocked, and the door opened. It was storming that night. No rain, just thunder, long, groaning peals that echoed unnaturally across the estate. One girl, Clara, claimed she saw the inspector walking the halls near the east wing at midnight. His shoes were off, his coat folded neatly under one arm. She said he was weeping silently. At dawn, his carriage was untouched. The bedsheets in the guest room were undisturbed. But one spoon was missing from the dining set, and a second place had been set, used, then cleared. The matron told staff he had left in the night. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in Montreuil. No return address, no signature. The ink was red and smelled faintly of iron. The letter included a single sentence: "She feeds what comes to her." An investigation followed, but no warrant was ever issued. The lead investigator, under pressure from the mayor's office, closed the case without explanation. His final report states that Inspector Coudray likely lost his way in the woods and perished. And yet, his jacket was found months later, neatly folded beneath the altar in the estate's chapel. On the inner lining, someone had stitched a phrase in thread too fine to be noticed at first glance. "I saw her face and remembered nothing else." After that, no other officials visited the estate. All correspondence was conducted by mail. Donations increased. So did the number of children. And from that point forward, every Sunday, a second bowl was prepared. Not for a child, for someone taller, hungrier, and never seen at the table. The first complaint came from a boy named Jules. He refused his bed for 3 nights, curling instead beneath the hallway windowsill, ear pressed to the wall. When asked why, he whispered, "It's warm," like something's behind it. At first, the staff assumed it was fever, but more children began to follow, dragging blankets to the edges of the house, pressing their faces to brick, murmuring softly before sleep. Some hummed lullabies they had never been taught. One girl, Colette, was found stroking the stone wall and murmuring, "Shh, she's resting." At mealtimes, they were distant. They stopped playing. Their drawings changed. No more stick figures or flowers. Only circular spirals, repetitive, red, sometimes punctured with tooth marks. Some carved the designs into their wooden bowls. When questioned, none of them could explain why. They only said it felt right, that the house liked it. By the 3rd week, the matron ordered their beds nailed to the floor. It didn't matter, the children dragged their pillows to the edges anyway, whispering to the corners, nuzzling into the warmth like infants returning to womb. One night, the cook reported hearing something like a sigh in the kitchen wall. Not wind, not creaking, a breath, long, heavy. Exhaled. That same week, 2 girls began knocking on the walls before speaking, soft taps before each sentence. When asked, they said it was manners. And then the bruises began. Round marks on their ribs, finger-like prints on thighs and collarbones. No one saw the cause. The matron blamed roughhousing. But the injuries never looked accidental. They were too perfect, symmetrical, as if held. One boy, Henri, was found sleepwalking. He'd stripped off his shirt and was pressing his bare chest against the bricks of the west wing. When pulled away, he vomited a thick red liquid and passed out. When he awoke, he smiled. "I found the heartbeat," he said. "It's mine now." Beneath the floorboards of the dining room, a low thudding began, slow and rhythmic, like a pulse buried deep. The staff claimed it was rats or plumbing, but it grew louder each week, more regular, and the children began to move in rhythm with it, rocking, swaying, breathing together. One teacher kept a journal. Her final entry before resigning read, "The walls are not walls, they are ribs, and we are inside something waiting to wake up." After she left, the children began sleeping with their mouths open, facing the bricks. And in the mornings, there was red dust on their tongues. The fire started just after morning prayers. Witnesses said the boy, Etienne, walked calmly into the library holding a lit candle. He didn't speak, didn't run. He placed the flame at the base of the central bookshelf, closed his eyes, and waited. The flames rose slowly, white, not orange, like chalk dust catching sunlight. Pages curled without burning, shelves cracked without sound. No one smelled smoke. No one coughed. The heat never came. Sister Mireille, first to respond, described the sensation as stepping into absence. She said her skin felt cold, her hearing dimmed, and her thoughts slowed, as if the room were underwater, but the water was memory. Children gathered at the threshold, watching in silence. None cried. One began to hum a low, droning tone, soon echoed by 4 others. The librarian stood paralyzed. Her hands trembled, but she made no move to stop it. In her later testimony, she said, "There was nothing to stop. The fire wanted to be there." When it died, nothing remained but perfect outlines, ghost shadows of furniture etched into the floor. The books were gone. Not burned, not reduced, just removed. Even the dust was gone. A flawless void. At the room's center, Etienne lay curled in the fetal position, eyes open, smiling. On the back of his neck, someone had drawn a circle in ash. Not a symbol known to the staff, but when shown to the children, they all recognized it instantly. "That's the mouth," said one. "It doesn't bite anymore." The priest, who blessed the room 2 days later, vomited upon entry and lost consciousness for 6 hours. Upon waking, he begged to be transferred. His final note before departure read, "I thought it was the devil, but this is older. This is what the devil kneels to." From that day on, the library was locked, not to protect the children, but to protect the rest of the house from it. Because at night they heard it breathing, and once it whispered. It said, "You are mine because you called me first." It began as rumor, whispers between maids, traded like ghost stories during chores. That on the night of the spring equinox, Madame was always absent. Not gone, just wrong. One year, the new cook found her at 4 a.m. in the root cellar, lying flat on the stone floor, hands folded across her chest, skin the color of milk. Her breath had stopped, no pulse, cold as clay. He ran for help, but by the time he returned with the groundskeeper, she was sitting up, brushing dust from her apron. Her first words, It's best if we pretend you didn't see this." Then she smiled and asked how he liked his eggs. The cook resigned a week later. The next year, the same thing happened, but this time it was a child who saw her. Little Celine had wandered to the attic looking for her doll. Instead, she found Madame wrapped in linen strips, lying on a long wooden table surrounded by candles that hadn't been lit. The girl was ushered out, scolded gently, and promised a new toy. From then on, it was unspoken. Do not look for her on the equinox. Records show that her bedroom fireplace was always cleaned the next morning, no matter the weather. Her clothing from that night, washed twice in salt water, the sheets burned in the garden, and always, before dawn, the chapel bell rang once, though no one touched the rope. In 1913, a visiting scholar staying for a month reported waking on March 21st to find a small trail of bloody footprints leading from the kitchen to the chapel. They were barefoot, delicate, the size of a woman's. He followed them. They ended at the altar. Madame was there, kneeling, her eyes rolled back. Her skin bore faint blue veins that had not been there before. She was whispering something over and over. "Take me in. Take them through. I break so they do not." The scholar wrote down what he saw. The letter never arrived. 3 days later, he was found trying to dig under the house with his bare hands. He'd pulled out 4 nails from his left hand before anyone stopped him. He kept repeating, "She dies so they don't. She dies so they don't." No one spoke to him after that. He was escorted out before the children returned from lessons, but the children always knew. They could sense when it was near. The change in air, the taste of the elixir that week, bitter, coppery. They would sleep in pairs, hold hands, pray, even the ones who didn't believe. Because if she didn't die that night, something else would. By morning, she was back in the kitchen, hair tied, apron clean, bread rising in the stove. She never limped, she never bruised. But once a child asked her why her shadow didn't match her hands. She just said, "That's the price of keeping you warm." The estate was shuttered in 1947. Official cause, structural instability. Privately, the papers filed mentioned incidents and trauma among minors, but no charges were ever brought. The last caretaker, an aging groundskeeper named Pierre Morel, locked the main gates himself, placed the iron key inside a hollowed stone, and never returned. Years passed. Vines choked the walls. The pond dried up. The chapel roof collapsed in a storm. But no one looted the place. Even scavengers kept their distance. The reason? The crying. Locals say it happens mostly in spring, between dusk and midnight. Hikers walking near the tree line report hearing it first as a murmur. Faint, like wind through reeds, but it grows louder the longer they listen. It's not one voice, it's many. Children sobbing, some in whispers, some in howls, and beneath it, humming. Always the same tune. A lullaby no one can name, but everyone agrees. It feels older than the house itself. A French urban exploration group tried to document it in '93. Their recordings captured something strange. Bursts of static, muffled weeping, and at one point, the unmistakable sound of someone saying, "Je suis prêt," I am ready. None of the crew had spoken those words. When they reviewed the tapes days later, several members fell ill. One left the group entirely. Another was found 6 months later in an underground chapel in Corsica, barefoot, surrounded by children's dolls arranged in a circle. She kept repeating, "I hear her cooking." In 2006, a new hiking trail was proposed through the forest that bordered the estate. Surveyors marked the path, but their equipment failed near the house. Compasses spun wildly, and GPS units lost signal. One of them, an engineer named Boucher, wandered off alone for 2 hours. When they found him, he was standing over a rotted floorboard inside what used to be the dormitory. He was crying. "I didn't know love could sound like this," he said. He refused to explain further. The room in question, once the girls' sleeping quarters, was designed without windows, like the rest of the estate. But when sunlight hits its northern wall at the equinox, it reveals something not seen in blueprints. Dozens of tiny inscriptions etched into the stone like a ledger. Names, dates, words like mine, fed, and returned. And between them, claw marks, hundreds. Some dig deep. In 2021, a drone captured footage of the estate's east wing before crashing midair. In the seconds before the feed cuts, the camera shows a sliver of movement inside the locked chapel, where no human has stepped in decades. It's not conclusive, but if you listen closely, you can hear it. Children humming. And if you slow the footage, frame by frame, you'll notice the walls seem to breathe. What haunts the house isn't a ghost in the usual sense. It's a memory, nourished, preserved, and repeated. A ritual so complete that even in absence it continues. A room that remembers what it was built to hold. And love, once twisted far enough, doesn't die. It echoes.